The laughter around the dinner table grew louder, but Amira's hands trembled under the tablecloth. Her husband, Kwame, leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, and smirked. Then, in front of everyone, her parents, her sister, and his friends, he said the words that would burn into her memory forever. I married the wrong sister. Look at Amaka, successful, confident, everything you could never be. The table erupted in awkward chuckles, but Amira's chest tightened as humiliation swallowed her. She smiled faintly, hiding her pain, but in that moment, a quiet vow was born. She would rise so high that the man who mocked her would choke on his own laughter. The laughter around the table grew louder, but Amira felt her stomach twist. She kept her eyes on the food in front of her, hoping no one would notice the way her hand shook as she lifted her glass. Kwame leaned back in his chair, his voice sharp and careless as he said, "You know, I think I married the wrong sister. Look at Amaka, successful, confident. She has everything Amira could never give me." The words cut through the air like a knife. For a moment, the room fell quiet, then awkward chuckles followed, as if people didn't know whether to laugh or stay silent. Amira's face burned. Her parents shifted uncomfortably. Her sister Amaka looked down at her plate, but Kwame went on, smirking as if he had told a harmless joke. Amira wanted to disappear. Every word felt like fire against her skin. She forced a small smile, hiding the storm raging inside her. She would not let them see her break. Her heart pounded, her throat tightened, but she stayed silent. Each second stretched painfully long as she sat there, listening to her husband tear her dignity apart in front of everyone who mattered to her. It wasn't just an insult, it was betrayal. The man she had trusted, the man she had chosen, had humiliated her in front of her own family. Her mother tried to change the subject. Her father cleared his throat and asked about work, but Kwame had already planted the seed of shame deep in Amira's chest. Amaka tried to smile at her sister with sympathy, but that only made it worse. To Amira, it felt like everyone at that table was pitying her. She sat there quietly, swallowing her pain, pretending to chew, pretending to listen, pretending to be okay. Inside, she was breaking. The words replayed again and again in her mind. I married the wrong sister. The humiliation was unbearable, but she refused to let a tear fall. She would not give Kwame the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Underneath the silence, something stronger than tears was forming. Rage. A cold, steady fire began to burn inside her. She told herself that she would never forget this night, and one day, she would make him regret every single word he had spoken. That night, after the painful dinner, Amira stayed quiet as everyone left the table. She helped clear the plates, her movements slow, her mind heavy with the words Kwame had spoken in front of both families. She thought the humiliation was over, but the night still had more to give. When Kwame stepped outside to see some of his friends who had joined for drinks, Amira went upstairs, hoping for a moment to breathe. But on her way past the balcony, she froze. His voice carried through the night, loud and careless, as he laughed with his friends. You all know I settled, Kwame said, his tone full of arrogance. I married Amira, but everyone can see Amaka would have been the better choice. She's smarter, successful, and honestly more of the woman I should have chosen. His friends laughed, clapping him on the back as if he had told the funniest joke. Amira stood hidden in the shadows, her heart breaking all over again. Every word felt like a knife, sharper than the ones she had endured at dinner. This time, it wasn't just a joke made at the table. It was the truth he believed in his heart. He didn't just embarrass her, he confessed that she was never good enough for him. Her hands trembled against the railing as she fought back tears. She couldn't believe that the man who once promised to protect her, to love her above all others, could speak so lowly about her to friends. It wasn't only humiliation now, it was betrayal. He didn't respect her as his wife. He didn't even see her as worthy. In his eyes, she was a mistake. Amira wanted to run down and scream, to demand why he had chosen her if he thought she was so beneath him. But she stayed still, her lips pressed tight, swallowing the pain like poison. She went back to the bedroom quietly, sitting on the edge of the bed in silence. The laughter from outside drifted in, each sound twisting the knife deeper into her chest. She felt smaller than she had ever felt before, as though her existence in his life was nothing but a shadow of what he truly wanted. In that moment, she understood that this wound would not heal with apologies. Something inside her hardened. The pain became fuel, and though tears burned her eyes, she promised herself one thing. She would rise, and one day, Kwame would regret every word he had spoken when he thought she wasn't listening. Amira lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while Kwame slept soundly beside her, unaware of the storm he had caused. His cruel words kept echoing in her head, but instead of crying, she felt something different rising inside her. She realized there was no point in confronting him now. If she argued, he would only laugh again or dismiss her pain. If she shouted, he would call her dramatic. And if she begged for his love, she would only lose the little dignity she had left. No, she decided. She would not fight him with words. She would fight him with silence and results. The next morning, Amira rose early, her face calm though her heart was still heavy. She prepared his breakfast as usual, acted like nothing was wrong, and even smiled faintly when he teased her. But behind that quiet smile was a vow he couldn't see. From that day, she stopped wasting energy trying to win his approval. Instead, she began to think of the dreams she had once buried, ideas she had pushed aside when marriage and life's demands had consumed her. She remembered her love for design, the business plan she had once drafted but never pursued, the notebook filled with sketches gathering dust in the back of her closet. Every night, after Kwame fell asleep, Amira would sit at the small desk in their bedroom with just a lamp on. She brought out her old notebooks, reading through them carefully, her fingers tracing the plans she had abandoned. Slowly, she began to polish them, improve them, and give them new life. While the world slept, she stayed awake, her pen moving across pages, her laptop screen glowing. What once felt like impossible dreams now began to feel like seeds waiting for water. Days turned into weeks, and her secret routine became her strength. She was exhausted from working late nights and still running the house during the day, but the fire in her heart kept her going. For the first time in years, she felt alive, not as Kwame's wife, not as Amaka's overshadowed sister, but as herself. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing, not even her family. She kept it hidden, guarded like treasure, because she knew her actions would speak louder than any defense she could give. Her silence became her shield, and her work became her weapon. Amira was no longer broken, she was building. One night at a time, one page at a time. She was preparing for the day when Kwame's laughter would no longer wound her, because she would be standing so high above it that he wouldn't dare look her in the eye. Amira's late nights slowly began to take shape into something real. One evening, as she opened an old box in the closet, she found the notebook she had once filled with plans and sketches for a business. Years ago, she had dreamed of starting her own fashion line, clothes that were bold, affordable, and different. But back then, her parents had laughed, saying it was too risky, and Kwame had told her it was a waste of time. So she had buried that dream, convincing herself it didn't matter. Now as she turned those pages again, her heart beat faster. The ideas still felt alive. It was as if they had been waiting for her all along. She sat at her desk, rewriting the plan with more focus than ever before. The doubts of others no longer mattered. She knew this was her chance, not just to prove herself to the world, but to heal the wound inside her. She stayed up night after night, refining every detail, researching, sketching designs, and calculating costs. Her small lamp became her companion, burning late into the night while Kwame snored peacefully, unaware that the woman he mocked was building a future right beside him. But Amira knew she couldn't do it all alone. One quiet afternoon, while Kwame was out, she sent emails to old schoolmates and acquaintances who worked in business and design. At first, she hesitated, afraid no one would respond. But slowly replies came. A friend she hadn't spoken to in years agreed to look over her designs. Another offered to connect her with a supplier. Someone else introduced her to a small investor who was interested in new ideas. Each message filled her with new courage, like stepping stones across a river she once thought impossible to cross. It wasn't easy. Some ignored her. Some doubted her. She faced rejection after rejection, but this time, she refused to give up. Every no only made her more determined. She worked through mistakes, learned how to pitch her idea better, and kept moving forward. She saved small amounts of money from her housekeeping allowance, hiding it carefully, until she had enough to make her first samples. When the fabric finally arrived, she held it in her hands and felt tears sting her eyes. It wasn't just cloth. It was the start of her freedom. In secret, Amira was laying the foundation of something powerful. No one knew. Not her parents, not Amaka, not even Kwame. But deep down she knew the truth. This quiet work, born from pain, was her breakthrough. It was the beginning of a life where no one would ever call her the wrong sister again. Amira worked in silence for months, building piece by piece what everyone once said she could never do. Kwame was too busy showing off his lifestyle to notice. Almost every weekend, he and Amaka posted pictures from expensive restaurants, laughing together with friends, always making sure the world saw their perfect image. At family gatherings, they would talk loudly about Amaka's new achievements, her promotions, her travels, while Kwame boasted about how lucky any man would have been to marry her. Amira sat quietly, listening, nodding, never revealing what she was building in the shadows. One evening, after sending out her samples to a few contacts, she received an email that made her breath catch. A small group of investors wanted to meet her. At first she thought it was a mistake. She read the message again and again, her hands trembling. They had seen her designs, and they were impressed. They wanted to talk about funding her line. That night, Amira couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart full of both fear and excitement. For the first time, she felt the possibility of success was real. The meeting came quickly. She dressed simply, carrying her sketches and samples with care. When she entered the room, her voice almost shook, but as she spoke about her vision, her passion took over. The investors listened, asked questions, and smiled at her determination. At the end, they offered her a deal, her very first. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to launch her brand. She signed the papers quietly, almost in disbelief. Holding the signed contract in her hands felt like holding a new life. When she returned home, Kwame didn't even ask where she had been. He sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, laughing at some joke Amaka had sent him. Amira walked past him with the biggest secret of her life burning in her chest. She wanted to scream in triumph, to tell the whole world what she had achieved, but instead she smiled softly and carried her papers upstairs. In silence, she folded them neatly into her drawer, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time in years, she felt powerful. The world outside still saw her as the quiet wife, the overlooked sister, but she knew the truth. She had planted her seed of success, and it was already beginning to grow. One day, everyone who mocked her would see it bloom. But for now, she carried her victory close, holding it like fire in her heart. At home, life carried on as if nothing had changed. Kwame still teased Amira, still made little comments that cut deep, and still compared her to Amaka whenever he wanted to get a laugh. He often told her she was too quiet, too ordinary, someone who would never make an impact. Amira no longer flinched at his words. She learned to smile faintly, nod, and let him believe she was the same woman he mocked at dinner that night. But deep inside, she was living a life he knew nothing about. Every night, after he fell asleep, she would quietly slip out of bed, switch on her laptop, and dive into her work. While Kwame dreamed peacefully, Amira was writing proposals, sending emails, and attending virtual meetings with investors from around the world. Her nights became her real life, and her days became a performance. During the day she cooked, cleaned, and carried on as the wife he thought he controlled. At night she transformed into the determined businesswoman who was building a future in silence. Kwame thought she was only busy with household chores, but he never noticed the glow in her eyes when she opened her laptop. He never saw how her notebooks filled up with strategies, designs, and plans. He didn't hear the excitement in her voice when she spoke quietly to her contacts, closing deals that would change her entire future. To him, she was still Amira, the plain wife who could never match his glamorous sister-in-law. But to her investors and partners, she was a rising star with a vision that demanded attention. Sometimes, while Kwame scrolled through his phone or bragged about Amaka's achievements, Amira would sit silently beside him, hiding a smile. If only he knew that the woman he dismissed was already securing contracts worth more than he had ever imagined. If only he knew that while he mocked her for not being enough, she was proving herself to people who believed in her brilliance. It was not easy balancing both lives. She was tired, working late into the night, and still waking early to run the household. But the fire inside her kept her strong. Each contract signed, each partnership confirmed, gave her new energy. Slowly, she was transforming, piece by piece, into the woman she was meant to be. And the sweetest part of it all was that it was happening right under his nose. Kwame thought he knew who she was, but the truth was slipping further from him every day. The woman he once called the wrong sister was becoming powerful, unstoppable, and soon the whole world would see her true face. Months passed, and Amira's hidden work blossomed into something greater than even she had imagined. What started as late-night plans and secret deals had now become a full company, her name whispered in business circles with respect. But she remained quiet at home, never revealing her progress to Kwame or her family. She wanted the truth to come out not through her words, but through a moment no one could deny. That moment finally arrived. A prestigious gala was being held in the city, a gathering of top entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders. Kwame insisted they attend, not for Amira, but because Amaka had been invited and he wanted to show off being part of her circle. Amira simply agreed, dressing in an elegant gown that made even her own reflection feel different. Kwame barely noticed her glow as he focused on his sister-in-law's arrival, eager to stand by her side. The evening sparkled with lights, music, and chatter. Amira walked quietly among the crowd, her presence calm but steady. Suddenly, the host of the gala stepped onto the stage, the microphone amplifying his voice across the grand hall. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate not only our achievements but also the rise of new leaders shaping the future of business. Please welcome the new CEO of one of the fastest-growing companies, a brand already valued in millions, Mrs. Amira." The room erupted in applause. Cameras turned, flashes lit up the hall, and all eyes swung to Amira. For a moment, silence clung to her like a veil as people realized the quiet woman standing among them was the one being honored. Kwame's jaw dropped, his wine glass almost slipping from his hand. Even Amaka blinked in shock, before breaking into a proud smile for her sister. Investors rushed forward, clapping, cheering, eager to shake Amira's hand. Amira stepped onto the stage with grace, her head held high. She wasn't trembling, she wasn't hiding, she was radiant. As she took the microphone, the applause grew louder. "This," the host announced again, "is the woman whose vision has captured the market and whose strength has inspired many. Let us give her the honor she deserves." Kwame sat frozen, the words echoing louder than any insult he had ever spoken. He remembered the dinner where he mocked her, the night he bragged about settling, the times he laughed at her silence. Now, those very silences had carried her to a place he could never reach. As Amira looked out into the crowd, she saw her family staring with wide eyes, her sister smiling with pride, and her husband drowning in regret. The same woman he once dismissed as the wrong sister now stood before the world, celebrated, admired, unstoppable. And there was no hiding from it anymore. Kwame sat frozen in his chair, his mouth slightly open as the applause for Amira filled the entire hall. He blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The wife he had mocked, the woman he had called a mistake, was now on stage being celebrated as the new CEO of a company worth millions. He could hardly believe his eyes. His fingers tightened around the glass in his hand, and for the first time in a long while, he had no words. Amira stood tall under the bright lights, her smile calm and confident as she accepted the recognition. The cameras flashed, investors pressed forward to shake her hand, and the crowd cheered her name. Kwame could feel the eyes of people around him shifting toward him, as if they all remembered how dismissive he had always been of her. His face grew hot, but he forced a smile, trying to act proud, though inside his heart was sinking fast. Beside him, Amaka leaned closer, clapping with genuine pride. "Congratulations, sister," she said warmly when Amira stepped down from the stage for a moment. Her eyes shone with happiness, and her hug was sincere. Amira returned it with grace, her composure steady. Kwame watched, a lump rising in his throat. This was the very sister he had compared her to, the one he had flaunted as the better choice. And yet here Amaka was, celebrating Amira's success without jealousy, while he sat drowning in shame. The memory of that painful dinner came rushing back to him like a cruel echo. He could still see Amira's face that night when he laughed and said, "I married the wrong sister." At the time, he had thought it was nothing more than a joke, something to get attention. But now, those words cut through his own heart, sharper than a blade. He realized he had been the wrong one all along. He tried to keep smiling, clapping along with the rest of the audience, but the regret inside him grew heavier by the second. Everyone around could see Amira's glow, her transformation, her strength. And everyone could also see him, the man who never believed in her, the man who chose mockery over love. As Amira walked past him with elegance, her eyes barely meeting his, Kwame's stomach twisted. His forced smile could not hide the storm inside him. The truth was clear. The woman he had underestimated was now out of his reach, and the cruel words he once spoke would haunt him forever. After the gala, Kwame's world turned upside down. Everywhere he went, people spoke about Amira. Friends who once ignored her now praised her brilliance. Business partners whispered about her rising company, and even his own family looked at her with new respect. Kwame, who had once treated her like a shadow, suddenly wanted to stand in her light. He began telling people how proud he was of his wife, claiming he had always known she was special. His voice grew loud at gatherings, bragging about her achievements as if they were his own. In public, Kwame transformed into the picture of a supportive husband. He held her hand more often, smiled at her with exaggerated pride, and told anyone who listened, "I always believed in Amira. I knew she had greatness in her." But Amira knew the truth. She remembered the sting of his laughter at the dinner table, the nights he bragged about settling, the times he compared her to Amaka as if she were nothing. His sudden praise felt hollow, like a man grasping at straws to save his own pride. At home, he tried even harder. He brought her flowers, offered to take her out to fancy dinners, and told her how beautiful she looked. But the woman sitting across from him was no longer the same Amira, who once stayed silent in humiliation. She had changed. She had grown stronger, and she could see through every word he spoke. His compliments no longer had power. His apologies, hidden beneath false smiles, no longer touched her heart. One evening, at a family dinner, Kwame raised his glass and said, "To my wife, the most brilliant woman I know. I always knew she would succeed." The room clapped politely, but Amira sat still, her eyes calm. She didn't argue, didn't expose his lies, but inside, she remembered everything. She remembered the burn of shame when he called her the wrong sister. She remembered the lonely nights when he mocked her while she worked in silence. She remembered the pain that had once broken her, now replaced by strength that made her untouchable. She gave him a small smile, the kind that carried no warmth, and simply said, "Thank you." But her heart had already moved on. His sudden change of tone could not erase years of humiliation. His desperate attempt to rewrite history could not undo the scars he had left. Kwame believed he could win her back with words, but Amira had learned to value actions. And his actions had spoken louder than anything else. The tables had truly turned. Once she lived in his shadow, but now he lived in hers. And no amount of praise could change the fact that she no longer belonged to him. The house was full that evening, laughter floating across the long dining table as relatives gathered for yet another family dinner. Months had passed since the night Kwame mocked Amira, but the memory was still sharp in everyone's mind. Back then, she had sat quietly, her heart breaking as his cruel words echoed, "I married the wrong sister." Tonight, however, the air felt different. Amira wasn't the timid woman they once pitied. She was glowing, powerful, and calm, seated at the same spot where her humiliation had once begun. Kwame sat across from her, his eyes restless, his smile strained. He had spent months trying to rewrite the past, praising her publicly, showering her with false affection, hoping she would forget. But the look in her eyes told him otherwise. She hadn't forgotten. She never would. The room hushed when Amira slowly raised her glass. Everyone turned toward her, expecting another polite toast. Instead, her voice rang steady, carrying both grace and weight. "To the man who once said he married the wrong sister," she began, pausing just long enough for the silence to thicken. Kwame's face drained of color, his hand frozen around his fork. Her gaze was unwavering, but there was no anger in it, only truth. "You were right," she continued softly. Gasps rippled around the table. Kwame forced a laugh, as if to dismiss her words, but his voice faltered before it could rise. Amira leaned forward just slightly, her next words cutting through the room like a blade. "Because the right version of me no longer belongs to you." The table fell utterly silent. No one moved, no one breathed. Amira set her glass down gently, her smile faint but unshaken. She stood, smoothing the fabric of her dress with elegance. And without another glance at Kwame, she turned and walked away. Her heels clicked softly against the floor, each step echoing with finality. Kwame sat frozen, his pride shattered, his lips pressed tight as the weight of her words crushed him. He had mocked her, doubted her, compared her to another woman, never realizing that one day she would outgrow him completely. Now in front of everyone, she had given her final word. Calm, dignified, and irreversible. Around the table, the family exchanged uneasy glances, some in awe of her strength, others in quiet judgment of Kwame's downfall. But no one dared to speak. The silence she left behind was heavier than any argument could have been. For the first time, Kwame understood what true loss felt like. He hadn't just lost Amira's love, he had lost the chance to ever matter in her story again.